Good morning. Welcome to our Policy Committee meeting, October 24th, 2022. We will start our Policy Committee meeting with an approval of the agenda. I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor? All those opposed? Good to go. Moving right along, public comment on agenda items. No public comment that I'm seeing on agenda items, so we will move right into it. The meat and potatoes. Ms. Graham will go to you for policies for review. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you all for having me. We're going to get started this morning. We have a good number of policies, but some of them should be fairly straightforward to move through, so hopefully we won't be here for too long. We're going to get started with GBEC, which is our personnel policy regarding drug use. And as you can see, there are some minor changes here. Oh, I'm sorry. There are some minor changes here, just sort of updating this policy to be more in line with the model policy. It has not been updated since 2013. And also just to reorganize in a way that made a bit more sense.
Christy, I see in that very first, or under employees, are we? I see the unlawfully, of course, is on that second sentence. Is that the difference there? Is that important?
You mean in the second sentence?
Yeah. Is there really any reason to have the first sentence?
Well, the first sentence is in regard to drug use, and the second sentence is in regard to alcohol use. But we moved it because you'll see that the alcohol use was originally down here under the definition of drug. And so when the committee looked at that, we decided that it didn't really make sense there. And so we just moved it to a location where we felt it fit a little better.
Yeah, so we cover, because I noticed we took out all the student pieces in here. So that's covered in a separate policy.
Yes, so we're going to look at that policy in just a moment, but this policy is specifically under the personnel section of the policy handbook. And so I think it had originally at one point been copied word for word in both the student portion and the employee portion, but we felt like it didn't really make sense to continue to do that. And as we make updates to one, it's hard to remember that you need to go look at a different section of the policy to update something to match. So we thought it best just to delete the student portion from this policy and leave it in the student section of the handbook. And then there's a brief change regarding, not a change, but just an update to the policy, adding this information about attending rehabilitation, and that is not a guarantee of reemployment, and that the district is not financially responsible for that. And then the additional information regarding over-the-counter medication and prescribed medication for staff members.
All good? Yep, good on that one. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. So next we have the accompanying rule that goes with this. And we are actually recommending deletion of this rule. If you look at it, it is almost word for word a copy of the information that was in the original policy. And so we feel like it's just repetitive and unnecessary. I don't know why it was even separated out as a rule, because it really says almost word for word the same information.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Ms. Robinson, all good?
Excellent. Okay. So we will move then to the student information. Let me just, I apologize for having to do this myself. Hopefully it goes smoothly. So the student policy regarding drug and alcohol use is JICH, and this is going to have similar information to our employee policy, but some minor differences, and it was updated last in 2019, but there were a couple of changes that have been made to the model policy since that time, so we've changed those here. The first of which is you'll notice the addition of the word market. This is to clarify whether the sale or distribution actually takes place. It is also against our code of conduct to attempt to sell or to market that to other students. And then we added a paragraph here regarding skip. If you look at the administrative rule, and not to make it too complicated going back and forth, but the administrative rule of JICH, we are also recommending deletion of that rule. And the reason for that is, again, that it's repetitive, but it does have some information in there regarding skip. And so we wanted to carry that over and make sure that we referenced that here in the policy, that students who violate this policy may be required to attend the skip program.
Looking at those two in conjunction, I'm just moving ahead a little bit to the rule. So I noticed in the rule, it broke out some of like first time, second time.
Yes, and so as we talk about the rule, I do want to say that all of the students who violate this policy are going to be referred to law enforcement within our schools. So it seemed unnecessary to list it out that first-time offenders would be referred, second-time offenders would be referred, because we do that anyway, regardless of whether they're first or second offenses. They are always referred to our SROs for law enforcement involvement at their discretion. We certainly do not determine what our law enforcement decide to pursue or not, and they make that decision in conjunction with the solicitor. So that is at their discretion, but we make that referral to them, and they're involved in that conversation.
Can I ask just a little bit off this, but I know that we have contractual agreements that come up every year.
Yes.
It's about that time. Have they approached us?
We actually renewed those over the summer.
Okay.
Those contracts were renewed, yes.
Okay.
So there's nothing in here about, I guess, an obligation to report if you see something.
For other students to have an obligation to report?
No, for employees.
Oh, for employees to have an obligation to report?
Mm-hmm.
Well, every employee is bound by board policy, and so I think knowing that it was a violation of board policy, they would be under an obligation to report. I would certainly defer to some of our administration, but I don't know of any teachers that would not report that to administration. I think that they would be required to.
What about if, for example, so like coaches that might not be employed, they're still employed under the district, so they'd still fall under those same obligations?
Yes, if you look at our, under our personnel policies, it defines employees as anyone who works for the school district, is paid by the school district, and even some more extensive volunteers are considered employees in terms of some of our board policies. And I would certainly suggest that this would be one of them, that they would have to report that. I would say if there's a concern that that's not happening, I would certainly share that with Dr. Robbins, and parents should share with their administrators.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions on that guy?
Okay. Are we okay with JICH as well as JICH-R?
Yeah, I think all that made sense.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move to policy JJI, which is a new recommended policy regarding interscholastic athletics. And that's not the correct one. This is a new model policy from SCASBA based on the update to the statutes regarding South Carolina High School League requirement to ensure that students are qualified to participate in the sports. And so they suggest that we have a policy, which we already do have one policy that references the South Carolina High School League rules, but this one makes it a bit more clear that their rules do govern our interscholastic athletes and provides a little more information on dual sport participation and middle school participation in sports.
So, Christy, can you just define what this means when it's talking about interscholastic athletics?
So that's going to be any athletic event that is governed by the South Carolina High School League, and they have quite an extensive list of the sports that they oversee.
Did we, have we shown this policy to Mr. Drake?
Yes, Mr. Drakefer participated in the committee that reviewed it initially, as well as a middle school principal and a high school principal.
So why, except football, why is football the only one that they're not allowed to participate in independent teams?
I would have to defer to them on that.
Just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Maybe we could just ask the high school league.
Sure, I'll get clarification on that and provide it to the board.
Okay. Yeah, I wonder if it just has something to do with, I forget what they classify football, like obviously it's a contact sport, but there's another word for it. And I wonder if that's something to do with that, maybe some concussion protocol. Yeah, that would be interesting to know why.
Sure, I'll find out what their reasoning is for that. That's a high school league rule, so I'll find out about that.
Any other questions on JJI? Good. So maybe when that comes to the board, maybe we can just go over that little
Sure,
question.
I'll be happy to provide that at the board meeting.
Perfect.
Okay. Next up, we have IMDA, which is also a new recommended policy from SCASBA regarding patriotic exercises. This is in response to the change in the state statute. So previously, the state statute did have information regarding celebrations and acknowledgments that have to occur at our schools for Constitution Day and Veterans Day, but it is adding on to that and allowing presentations by what the South Carolina State Legislature has determined to be youth patriotic societies. And the state statute is quite clear about who qualifies as a youth patriotic society, as well as what that presentation should look like. And so we determined that it would be best to add all of this to the policy so that all of our schools could be clear about what the requirements were for having those celebrations and acknowledgments of these days. And the information that is a proposed change here to the Youth Patriotic Society section is straight from the statute, but for some reason was not originally included in SCASBA's proposed model policy. And so we thought that it would be best to sort of model that specifically after the statute.
Yeah, what were some of the, this came up a few months ago, I remember. What were some of the examples of the youth patriotic societies?
It is the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Future Farmers of America, and I believe there is one more. If you give me just a moment, I can tell you what that is.
I thought it was like the American Legion or something like that.
I don't believe it's specifically the American Legion, but it is something similar to that. Apologize, I do have it here.
But like you said, that's defined by statute.
Yes, and I believe that other organizations can petition for the legislature to define them as a youth patriotic society. So that's why we don't specifically list what they are here in our policy, because that may change over time. Just the ones I said? Thank you.
Can I just ask, so I understand, I'm sure it's simple, but where it says no school shall allocate more than 30 minutes total annually to presentations by youth patriotic societies, should more than one youth patriotic society make a timely request, the available time shall be allocated equally among the requesting. So what if you are accommodating the 30 days that they require, but there's already been 3 that did it a month before you? Does that 4th one just not be allowed?
They would not be provided the opportunity. Yes, that's why they limit it, because we don't want too much time to be taken away from their educational studies. And so that's why the state statute provided that limit of 30 minutes annually. So the organizations have a responsibility to make that request of the school, and then those who make that request timely the time will be divided out among them. So the statute is a little bit conflicting in that it says at least 10 minutes, but then it goes on to say that it's divided equally. And since several organizations have been approved, conceivably, if all of them ask for time, they would be allocated less than 10 minutes each, but the statute seems to indicate that that is acceptable, since it specifically says that it has a limit of 30 minutes.
It is a little confusing.
Yes, it is a little confusing. So if they did hold that time, say on Constitution Day earlier in the year, and they have used that full 30 minutes and someone requested after that time period, then that 30 minutes would have already been used for the year, and they could make that request the following year. And I do just want to clarify that there was concern that this would create an open forum in our schools. The state legislature has said that they do not believe that that is a concern, because they have specifically identified the organizations that are eligible to come and speak. And so it does not open that up to any organization who wants to speak to our students, because typically we don't permit that in our schools. So
Still kind of confusing.
Yeah, and I think, again, I mean, it sounds like it's based on statute, right?
yes.
Yeah, that's important for us.
Yes, and the statute is referenced there at the bottom.
Okay.
Oh, actually,
Maybe
it's
not. I
not on
think
this
yeah,
one,
it's
but
gotta
it
get
will be
updated on
by
there.
the time it's posted on the website.
Okay.
I was going to ask, and I know from time to time it comes up, we look at the Pledge of Allegiance. That's in a separate policy, correct?
Yes, that is a separate policy and a separate statute. And this policy actually encompasses several different statutes, but they referenced it all into one policy for SCASBA purposes.
Perfect. All good on IMDA? Okay. No other questions?
Okay. Next up, we have an update to a policy. Actually, SCASBA put out a model policy for IMDB, but we actually already had one from 2002. I'm not sure what happened to SCASBA's. They might have taken it away and we never took it off ours. So now we would just update that to reflect also an additional change in the statute that in addition to flying the United States and South Carolina flags outside of schools, starting in January of 2023, they will be required to display an American flag, a South Carolina flag inside the school, not a flag itself, but a depiction of the flag, an accurate depiction of the flag, as well as the United States motto and South Carolina's 2 mottos. So that information is here, and we will be doing that in a consistent manner across the district. So the district office will be identifying specifically what that should look like in each school, and they'll be applying it the same in their schools. So that will be done by January 1st, which is the statute.
That should make Mr. Constitution real happy.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing.
Okay. Any questions about that?
Is there another, did we create the language, the other South Carolina motto? Did we create that?
We did not create that. That is from the state statute. I guess it is our second motto. I actually did not know before the state statute that that we had two mottos. So I guess that's why they put it in place so that we could all be better informed about that.
It's just weird, weird language, just the other one.
Yeah.
You know,
The official one and the other one.
Put the real one and then that other one. Put that in
Yes.
there. Okay.
Yep.
Any questions? Yep.
And I did just want to go back for just a moment on the previous policy. I apologize, but I did want to clarify that the timeline for starting the Youth Patriotic Society is next school year. It has to go into effect by July of 2023. But since all of those timelines have passed or will pass by the time the board reviews this policy for first and second reading, we wanted to go ahead and get it in place. So that will actually begin for next school year. But certainly our schools have continued to recognize Constitution Day and Veterans Day and Patriotism Week as was already required by statute. But the Youth Patriotic Society portion is new. Okay. Next up, we are going to move to policy BID. And as we move into these policies, we're going to be looking at the removal of the reference to the National School Boards Association. So there are just a couple of policies here that specifically reference National School Board Association. And as you all know, South Carolina has pulled out of the National School Board Association, and we are no longer members. There is another national organization that has formed, but in an interest of making our board policies broad and longer lasting, we thought it best not to reference that specific organization either, so that the board can choose which organization they want to associate with should that organization dissolve or not take off in the way it's anticipated. So as you can see here in BID, we just removed the reference directly to the National School Boards Association and say that members can attend conferences sponsored by the South Carolina School Board Association and other prior approved board conferences.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, I mean, does it make any sense? And years ago, I think if you had asked any of us if we would have to take NSBA out of this, we'd probably say no big deal. Is there a reason to leave SCSBA?
I will say that that was something we considered, whether we should just remove it and indicate state association. We certainly could. It would make the policy more broad in general. At this time, there is no competing organization with South Carolina School Boards Association, so I don't know that that's necessary, but we certainly could. If something were to occur, then we would have to go back and look at our policies everywhere they're referenced, but there are a good many references to them throughout the policies.
I'm actually good with it staying in.
And I am too. I'm not trying to say it either
Yeah.
way. I just wanted to maybe play a little bit of devil's advocate. Yep.
Sure.
But
Okay.
I'm perfectly okay if it stays in there. Yeah. Like I said, if we had to in the future, we could revisit it.
Well,
Kind of like
and it gives us even more credibility, I think, to belong to a statewide school board association. Yeah. And vice versa, it gives them credibility to have us.
Okay,
Okay?
good, yep.
If we're all okay with that change, we will move on to policy BJ, which is Board Legislative Program. And again, this is one that has been recently updated in 2019, but did include a reference to the National School Board Association. And here, we did recommend deletion of both because it says legislative representatives, both state and federal. And there could potentially be other legislative representatives besides the South Carolina School Board Association. So in this case, we did recommend removal of both. Do you need a paper copy?
Mine went that way too, but I don't know what just happened. I know, mine did that. Do you want to come look on mine? I just saw there was a shooting in St. Louis, Missouri in a high school. 2 students have been transported to a local hospital. That's sad.
It's terrible.
Mine did that too. Do you want to come sit here, though?
I can, yeah. I don't know what I did. Sorry. It's like somehow, oh, thank you. Sorry, thank you.
Not a problem. It should be near the back of it.
I think when you say legislative representatives, that just kind of covers everything we might need to. So, yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think that's just an easy update.
Still haven't found it. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Where the pages are folded up towards the back, it should be the policy right in front of that.
While we're getting that pulled up, and then, so, is that an appendix that looks like we're recommending deletion?
There is an exhibit, and
Yeah.
that is, it was an advocacy calendar. I am not sure why we had that as part of board policy. That's certainly not something that would typically be included in policy, and so we're recommending deletion. Certainly, we recommend that the board continue to advocate and take part in the legislative process to further public education, but I don't know that having a specific calendar is helpful. I think that that is going to be dependent on the year and what issues are before our legislature and what issues are most important to our district at that time. So we recommend deletion of the calendar.
Yeah, I agree with that. Looking at this calendar, of course, like you said, that stuff can change. I mean, day in, day out, month by month, year by year, so it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
To even have that in there.
Okay. If we're okay with BJ and BJE, we will move on.
Everybody good
from
with
there.
those updates? Okay.
Okay. Next up, we have BK, which I apologize, doesn't seem to be open here.
What is it again? B?
BK, which is board membership in professional associations.
Thank you.
And this is again to remove the direct reference to the fact that the district does not maintain a relationship with National School Board Association through South Carolina School Board Association at this time.
Yeah, and I think, Tanya, this is what goes to your point, to be included with the South Carolina School Board Association, to be affiliated with them. This policy mentions that, so.
Okay, thanks.
Any concerns on that one?
Mm-mm.
Okay. And then lastly, in this list, we have policy LA, which is Education Agency Relations Goals and Objectives. And again, there was a reference to the National School Boards Association, and that was just corrected to be National School Board Associations because, like I said, there is a new one that has been formed that we may be associating with, and so we are associated with through the South Carolina School Board Association, and so just making reference to the National School Board Associations that may be providing information to districts in terms of their interest in public education.
I think it was a good catch.
Yeah, is there, and I think Ms. Wimberly and I were both kind of looking at it, could you just remove, is there any reason to have that last sentence in there at all?
I don't think it's required, no, we could just remove it altogether.
I mean, it's silly to have a one-sentence policy.
Yeah, that, I think that would be a question is whether we need this as a current policy or not.
I mean, that was kind of my question. Do we need this policy?
I don't think that it's required, no. I think this board is very active in ensuring that we further the interests that plague our school district and public education. And so I think that's mentioned several other times in our policies in terms of us working with organizations who do legislative advocacy to further our interests. So I don't know that it would be necessary to have this particular policy, particularly if we're going to remove it down to just one sentence, it might make more sense just to delete that altogether.
Yeah, looking at it, because I know like in our board member roles and organization, I mean, this is all covered
Redundant.
in there, yeah.
But do you like just the one sentence then? Is that what you're saying?
I think if we're going to do that, then we just remove it. Because like I said, it's covered in other policies.
It's covered, but this is the policy, right? This is the exact policy.
This is the policy that we currently have with the recommended changes, but we have several other policies, some of the ones that we've just looked at that reference
Okay.
the school board's involvement with other organizations and with promoting public education and working with our legislative delegates on issues that arise for our district. So I don't know that this particular policy is specifically necessary. And obviously, the district is going to continue to work with the South Carolina Department of Education and U.S. Department of Education. That's covered by a statute and many of our other board policies.
It just seems so vague.
I agree.
Yeah.
Vague yet also, but it's interesting because it's also very specific. Because if you start saying may extend to
May,
these
two
organizations,
things, just list those.
right? And then let's say that we reach out to another organization. I mean, technically, somebody could come and say, well, you're outside of your policy now.
Yeah, I mean, it says may extend, so I think there could be other organizations. But yes, I think up until recently, there have not been a lot of organizations in this field. And so I don't think that people really had a concern about identifying specific ones. But I think now that we're seeing how that could play out, it might be best just to delete it altogether,
Just to delete it, you say, altogether? Yeah.
just to remove the policy.
Yeah, that would be my feeling, would be to delete it.
And also from section L that only has
And
two
redundant,
policies, three policies
and
anyway.
redundant at the same time, because
It
covering
is
other things.
really
It's
vague.
certainly not that we're saying we shouldn't cooperate with or be interested in, but I think it's,
Especially if it's in others,
Yes.
yeah.
you know,
Okay.
So, and that's the last one we have, correct?
That is not quite the last one. That's the last one in terms of removing National School Board Association.
Okay.
But we do have one additional policy and its accompanying rule that were referred back to this committee by the full board after consideration at the last board meeting, and that's policy BGBGD regarding policy process and board review of administrative rules. And both the policy and the rule are back before the board today, but I don't know that there were any proposed changes to the rule, just that it came back with the policy. But for the policy itself, my understanding of the concerns that were expressed were regarding these final two sentences of this paragraph here. And so I would open that up for the board at this time. The district does not have any proposed changes to that language. As you can see, that language was specifically previously included in the policy here. It's just been moved to a different section. As well, at the board's request, I did contact the attorneys at SCASBA, and they said that they have not had any concern raised to them by any other district or any other community member that this language would be interpreted to block the review of policy by school boards, and they do not intend to change that language based on this concern. So they felt comfortable that their proposal was appropriate and accurate, and so following that, the district also does not propose changes to the policy. However, it's certainly the board's prerogative to make those changes if they like other language better.
So I think some of the concern raised was just that the appearance that maybe if it gave the superintendent the authority to decide whether or not he would present something to the board. And I guess the clarification is that he would do that no matter what. Does that make sense what I'm saying? The question is, does it give him the authority to decide whether or not he should present it to the board, or is it just saying that this is the process of how it's done? He will receive it and then he will present it to the board.
Yeah, and I think that I would be careful about saying that he would present every recommendation that's made, because some recommendations may come in from community members where the district committee determines that that is just not feasible, appropriate, for our district. And so I think that certainly the superintendent would not intend to use this policy to block presentation of any reasonable policy recommendations that might come before the board. But I would caution that I don't know that you could say that every single recommendation would be brought to the board unless that is the superintendent's directive explicitly, in which case certainly we would continue to do that.
And I guess the point being, I could see that, so if somebody were just dead set on a policy that maybe was not not within legal bounds, for the superintendent to present that to us is not, I wouldn't want that recommendation. So I could see I guess the only thing that maybe you could add in here, and you guys tell me if this makes sense, but do you add something that says, in a case where a particular proposal or policy is not presented to the board, written documentation or follow-up would be presented to that individual or group?
Well, maybe, because I agree, it's not that he necessarily has to recommend it to the board, but does the board want to know? In other words, if we get something, even if it's not something he would recommend, should we as board members know that it was still presented to the superintendent? I mean, is that our responsibility? Does that make sense what I'm saying? It's not that he has to recommend it, but it's just, should he be telling us in some way so that we're aware of what's coming out from the community?
Yeah, and I think you're right.
Our
And I think
constituents.
that would alleviate the concern. I think if you had something in there that says formal requests for policy change, update, however you word it, formal requests of that nature will be provided to the board on a continual basis. So that way we know, and I'm not talking because, and again, I think what very foreseeably could happen, Dr. Robbins is in the grocery store, he sees Mary Smith. Mary Smith says, hey, Dr. Robbins, you really need to update this bus policy to blah, 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 blah. To me, that's not necessarily a quote-unquote formal
Well, and it
policy
says they will
request.
be presented in writing and given.
Right.
So, I
And
mean,
that's
yes,
what
I
I'm
agree.
saying.
It has to be done the correct way.
Exactly.
But if he receives something in writing that's done correctly, I guess the question is, do we feel that we should know about it?
Yes.
And I think we want to.
Yeah, and I think that's,
Right.
absolutely, I think that's okay.
Sure.
So maybe, Chrissy, can you think about some language? I think it would go after this sentence to that effect? I mean,
Or
I know you're,
perhaps changing the language upon recommendation from the superintendent. Perhaps it could be changed to presentation by the superintendent, the board would consider. I'm happy to think on the appropriate way to modify that language. I will just say that one of the other considerations that the district considered is that community members have a lot of avenues to address the board directly. And so while this policy does say that proposals should go to the board, to the superintendent to be presented, if a community member felt that a proposed change needed to occur, they could certainly come to a board meeting and express that, as well as we know community members
Well,
do.
you're right, they could, but it doesn't say it in the policy. So I think that's the issue, because we know that they will and they do.
and I think, right, and so that being the case, I think what should happen, and again, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, so when a community member brings that up, they come to a board meeting, they bring up this policy change update request, my thought process has always been the superintendent's office is the central point of contact for that type of request. So yes, we're all hearing it, but he then takes that on and follows this process. We create a formal written recommendation or whatever we're going to do. And then I think if we add in kind of what we're talking about, the superintendent will then keep us apprised on a continual basis. Because we need, we do need to know. If it's gone through a written formal process,
Sure.
and for whatever reason the superintendent feels, hey, I can't bring this to my board because, hey, it's not legal, it violates something or the other, we already have it in policy, I think we need to know about
Yes,
that.
I agree. We need to know, because the other thing is then, most likely, people are asking us about it anyway. So I think us being as informed as possible is important. And it's, so, I mean, it seems silly to have that in there, but I think it's important. It's just that,
We can certainly add something then afterwards, clarifying that all proposals from outside sources will be presented to the board on an ongoing basis so that the board will have that information and.
right, and I think the key there
if
is
the-
presented or informing, not necessarily recommending. It doesn't have to be
Right.
something that you're planning to do, but just so that we have all the information.
I think that's all you have to do is change the word from A to all. The superintendent will present all proposed policies. Wouldn't that solve it? Instead of a,
All right, which line are you looking at, Ms. Robinson?
I'm probably not looking at the right thing, but the superintendent will present a proposed policy in writing to the board. If he was to present all proposed policies, wouldn't that just solve everything? It's on
I apologize, I just may not be
the
seeing it
bullet,
on the
it's the
sheet.
first bullet, and I'm reading the whole thing, so I may just, I saw this and thought, wouldn't that just
It
solve?
might be
Oh,
on the
I
rule.
think you're looking at the rule, yes.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, if you just put all proposed policies, wouldn't that just solve the whole kit caboodle for all of us, that the board members would always know?
Yeah, I guess it gets a little bit tricky. I agree with you. I see what you're saying.
Because that's what we're requesting. Bring it to the board so they can, at least like Ashley said, they know what's being said out in the community.
I think I just want to know, from a board member perspective, if a policy isn't being presented to us for some reason, I think I would want to know why.
Right, we need to be able to understand why
Right.
it's not feasible. Yes.
And I don't think we get like hundreds and thousands of policy
No,
requests.
no. And I trust this, I trust the cabinet and the superintendent if that's what they want, but that way we know
Yes.
how to also argue the point if we needed to. It's
Yeah,
just
so
being
the-
super transparent.
And again, thinking about that, the fact that we don't get hundreds and thousands of these things, and I think that may be okay. Just that he's going to present all.
That's fine.
He still has, I think there's still, he has to be, like you said at the last board meeting, he or she has to be a part of that process because
Right.
they are the ones in the field. They understand, is this policy change even legal?
Right.
So we have to leave them in that process.
Agreed.
But they can't be the arbitrator of policy. That's us.
Right, yes. I think just making that distinction is important.
Okay, so do we want to add the additional sentence to the policy or just change that word A to all in the administrative?
And from policy to policies.
Okay. I see.
I think you could almost get rid, so if in the rule, change to all, right? So all proposed policies, and then in the actual policy, is there a need, if we're going to do that, is there a need for that last sentence upon recommendation from the superintendent? Could you just get rid of that last sentence? And then I think that clears up that language, right?
Yeah. if
Yeah,
you-
I don't know that that last sentence is required. Certainly, the board would consider it prior to acting on it. So I
Yes.
don't know
Yeah.
that that's really.
So maybe we should get rid of
required.
that last sentence,
And then change
change
the
A to all,
Yeah.
and I think that resolves the concern that was brought up.
Yeah.
I think so too. I agree.
Okay, we will certainly make that change, and that concludes the policies we had for presentation today.
Perfect. Thank you. We got through those in a timely manner. I would just ask the committee, so I'll make a motion to accept all the policies. The one variation from the list, policy LA, that Lima Apple, the one we're going to propose for deletion.
Yes,
So I'll make a motion to accept those as presented.
I second
All those any discussion? All good? All those in favor? And opposed? None? We are good. So we will open it up for public comment. Public comment? Public comment. Going once, going twice. Sold, no public comment. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you guys so much. See you tonight.